Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of Crown World Mobility's Perspectives Live series. Our webinars typically coincide with the release of our Perspectives article series. This is an opportunity to hear an additional angle on the topic straight from our own subject matter experts here at Crown World Mobility. Hello, my name is Linda Fitzgerald, and I'm the Regional Marketing Manager based here in Danbury, Connecticut, and I'm responsible for the marketing in North America. For us to quickly get started, I want to give you a couple of technical tips to keep things running smoothly. You will be on mute throughout this session. If you can also mute yourself, please do so. Should you have any technical issues during the webinar, please note that my email and telephone number is listed on the right side of your screen in the chat box. Please contact me directly for any help. You will hear from me again during the question and answer period at the end of the session. And let me give you one more tip. Crown's Perspective Live webinar has a CRP credits available for ERC's professional certification. If you'd like to gain credits, please write down the session number on the screen, 15237. We will show this number again at the end of the webinar. Now I am pleased to introduce you to Crown World Mobility's Global Practice Leader for Consulting Services, Lisa Johnson. Lisa has been with Crown for 5 years now, and she is responsible for our Perspectives articles and Crown's industry research. She supports our clients with their mobility policies and program strategies, and she is a leader in addressing innovation and shifts impacting our industry. Lisa has been in the global mobility arena for more than 20 years and is one of the early thought leaders in the assignment-related return on investment and in the talent mobility area. With no further ado, let me hand it over to Lisa Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, and welcome, everybody. It's great to have you here with us for our Perspectives Live session. It's our last one of the year, and really excited to spend the next hour with you. For this session, I want to start by just giving you a quick introduction to today's topic, which has been built around a survey that we have just completed here in the last quarter of the year. And then we're going to spend the majority of our hour on those survey findings and looking at the data and doing a little bit of analysis in terms of what it means and some predictions that we can make. I'll take a really short time to do a quick wrap-up at the end and hopefully leave a little bit of time there for some Q&A also. And Linda will come back and join us, and we'll do the Q&A using the chat function. So as we go through this, if there are some questions that you have, why don't you jot them down on a piece of paper, and then we can put them into the chat function towards the end. And if there's any questions that we don't get to, you can send me an email, and I can respond to you directly there. So we've got a lot to cover. This was a big study that we did, and I really want to think about it in terms of what it means for smarter mobility and lower cost options. So fasten your seatbelts and let's get started. The first thing I want to do is just give a little background on the survey topic that we chose this year and what we're going to be thinking about in terms of this smarter mobility, this lower cost alternatives. At Crown and in our industry, we've been talking about a new normal for a few years now. It's that notion that companies want to find new ways to move their employees and to shift away from traditional long-term assignment policies and approaches. And the primary driver for this change was and still is lowering the cost of the move. A traditional move, as you and I know, can be 3 to 8 times the employee's salary each year, depending on things like the family size, the level of the employee, the policy that you use, and the home and host locations. Cost savings is a big reason for finding alternatives. But there are at least 2 more drivers of this change that I see as critical. So I want to just go through those quickly with you now. First, global mobility professionals, you here on this call, all of us, are a lot more strategic in terms of what we bring to our jobs. The people that we're hiring today are, we have, in order to compete within our industry, in order to keep up, we have to be more strategic thinkers with more business acumen in terms of supporting our organizations in different ways than maybe if we were starting our careers 20 years ago, as I did, right? So we've had to keep up, we've had to evolve, and those of you who are coming into our industry now are just you have to come with a different set of skills and competencies. Also, technology makes us smarter in terms of being able to see the big picture, doesn't it? So with technology, even if you have a very limited amount of technology, because we know that there's a real wide range out there of companies that are just getting started with using technology around their mobility program, and others of you who are at a much more mature and sophisticated place. But with a little or a lot of data, you can know a lot more about your program, how much spent, which employees are a good fit for what role, more clarity around assignment objectives, even the ability to track global career paths, right? We have smarter ways of working, which means so much, one size fits all is obviously a thing of the past. All right, so focus on cost savings, smarter ways of working, and finally, this new normal is driven by an evolving talent mobility strategy. More than ever before, companies have to be agile in terms of moving the right skills to fill the right jobs and moving jobs to the right people. Attracting and retaining the best people is absolutely the name of the game today for any company. We know that millennials dominate the workforce for many of our clients, for many of you out there, and we need to create an environment for this new generation to thrive. It's absolutely critical, and that's driving some real changes in how mobility works. That's driving the talent mobility approach, right? And so that is a big piece of what I want us to be thinking about as we go through this topic today. And I share with you the findings from this survey, but also attach it to thinking of your own programs and your own way of thinking about a smarter, lower cost, more agile way of running a mobility program and of supporting different organizations. So with that background, let's move forward into some of the topics around within the survey and the data. So for this survey, we looked at 3 types of moves. Really, permanent transfers were there, which aren't new, but let's look at some new ways that they're being used potentially. Local plus and localization. 3 types of moves that are potentially great alternatives to the traditional move types. We wanted to find out what's new, what's challenging, and what is changing. Within the survey that we conducted, we had just over 100 participants, and you can see there from a wide range of industries, and it was a global survey. Many of you participated in it, and we appreciate that, and it went across all regions in terms of the participants. The numbers that I'm keen to watch here, so we had just over 100 participants. The numbers that I'm really interested in looking at, and I'm going to focus on a good deal today, are in that 25 to 30% range of some shifts. Right? So we want to see who's leading edge in terms of whether it's because of your business model, your employee population, or your talent mobility strategy, that you're kind of leading us in this industry to show us the use of more agility in your program with some of these alternative move types. So we're going to see some bigger numbers. We're going to see some smaller numbers. So I'm going to really look at where's those leading edge companies and what they're doing. So I want to think about it in those terms as well. All right, so with that, let's move forward. And we're going to start with permanent transfers. Permanent transfers, as you all know, have been around for a really long time. They're not new, but they're being used more, and they're being used as a viable alternative to temporary assignments, right? So we think about why, and we know that they're cheaper. There aren't those ongoing costs of a temporary assignment. There's more of the one-time relocation upfront costs. They allow for career moves in global companies, right? We can source our new we can source roles within the organization. We can source for filling new roles in different parts of the world and in different parts of the companies. There are lots of great reasons for organizations to use permanent transfers. The implication is permanent, meaning that the employee wraps everything up, sells their home, their car, packs everything, and makes a one-way move to another location. That's the assumption. And it's interesting because actually I was in our Crown's Santiago, Chile office just last week, and we were having a discussion with the team there about the fact that this permanent transfer, just the word permanent sounds so permanent, and in some cultures that's really a barrier to getting people to use that policy or to agree to go. So we were trying to come up with maybe some alternative names for it, even if it means the same thing, like a global career or a global transfer. I think that you shouldn't be afraid of being creative with the way that you name your policies in your program to make them fit the need for a more agile workforce. And if the name of a policy is a barrier, then that's an issue in itself. So don't be afraid to stray from the names of the past. All right, but I don't want to digress too much. Let's move forward with the permanent transfer policy types. As you all probably know, I think it's interesting that there are two different types of permanent transfers in terms of policies. The first is the most common, and you can tell from the data on your screen there on the left, the company requested permanent transfer, and 91% of participants have that. So almost everyone has a company requested permanent transfer policy. And you probably just call it the permanent transfer policy, right? But we're differentiating with the other type of policy that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to keep referring to it as this company requested policy. So that might be that we have an opening in another part of the world and we want to move Debbie to that role, and we're going to permanently transfer that person, not as an assignee, but to fill a permanent role in another location. Or perhaps we're closing our office in Argentina. We want to keep Anna, who works there, and Anna, we say we're going to move you. If you're willing to go and want to stay with the company, we will move you to our Santiago, Chile office, right? So that's where we would have this company-requested transfer. The second type of permanent transfer policy that we asked about in the survey is the employee-requested permanent transfer. We wanted to know if companies have this type of policy and if it's more popular today than it was before, any challenges with it, et cetera. So you can see here just over half of companies have this type of permanent transfer move policy, the employee requested. Sometimes it's called self-initiated or employee-initiated. And I really want to look at that one. We can see half of the companies participating in the survey have it. We know that in the past it's been around for a long time, but often it was that policy that you had to dust off because it was very rarely used. In a talent mobility world, we're seeing it as the usable, useful policy. But there are also some challenges with it. So we're going to think of both of these, and I think they're both important for different reasons. So let's start with those familiar ones, the company-initiated permanent transfers that almost everyone has, okay? We're going to get started with that one. And one of the first things that we looked at was just, are these policies, the permanent transfers, used more or less frequently than the long-term international assignment policies? Because now I think, and maybe some of you are seeing the same thing, this policy that was traditionally a one-way permanent transfer is being used in many cases like a low-cost local-to-local move, right? And it represents companies that really want to support those global career paths, global staffing strategies, and potentially move away from temporary long-term assignment model. We have some clients who don't even have a long-term international assignment policy. This is the only one that they've got. So I'm going to pick out a few interesting, or what I consider fun, bits of data, and we'll see what you think. So first of all, we want to know, are they being used more frequently or less than the long-term assignments? And I see it pretty much even there, right? About 45% are saying, hey, we're using this a lot more. Or more, and about 50% are saying less. So it's right there, right there in the middle at 50%. So we'll see which one you are. We also asked, do you expect an increase in company-initiated permanent transfers in 2018? Now, about one-third, 32% of you said that you do expect an increase, and another 23% said, I don't know. That's not something I'm aware of. Of course, 45% said that you don't expect an increase. So we want to know if it's being used more frequently, and we want to know if there's going to be an increase. And 32% said yes. That's a pretty good size, about a quarter who don't know. So let's just look at the why behind those who said yes, we expect an increase. Because that's interesting, is what's driving it. Because that's going to tell us if the driver is something that might be giving us a prediction for the way that this type of policy is going to be used increasingly in the future. Maybe not next year, but as your company matures and as things change in the work environment. So for those who said yes, there were three main reasons identified in the responses. And in the survey report that's going to be released a little bit later this week, it has a lot more detail and a lot more examples from the survey findings. So I'm giving you a taste here, but if you want to really go more in depth in terms of what companies said and some of those findings and the analysis, then the survey report you're going to have a lot of fun with as well. So this is just our little a pre-taste. Okay, so the three main reasons for the responses for those companies that said we are expecting an increase, those 30%. Lower cost compared to an assignment was by far the number one reason, right? It's so much cheaper. But there's also a growing demand for permanent transfer moves, and global business growth is driving that. So these quotes that you have on the screen in front of you, one on there on the left is from the Oil, Gas, and Engineering company, and they said business has more appetite for upfront one-time costs versus costs over a 2-year period. There on the right, the pharmaceutical healthcare participant said the business sees this as an opportunity for cost savings versus expat assignments. So there's some real consistency there in that seeing this as a viable alternative. Let's take a look really quickly at some of the most typical policy benefits for company-requested permanent transfer policy. Let's go with the left column, and I'm going to kind of make you pay attention today because some of these are going to go left to right and some are going to go up and down. But for this slide, we're just going to look at it from a vertical with the columns there, and we're going to start on the left. These 6 policy benefits were the most typical ones cited in the survey report for the permanent transfer policy. Not too many surprises there, right? Immigration support right up top, that's going to be the case for all of the policies. There's our compliance-related driven policies, right? Having a written policy. So immigration support received 85 responses, and we'll go down. There in the middle, you have the tax return preparation, familiarization trips, host country compensation, right, because it's a local permanent transfer, some settling in assistance, some intercultural training. There on the right, you've got your language training, tax assistance, repatriation support, home leave. That's interesting to me, right? Is that like put a little flag up for you that the home leave and dependent education are still there in some of the stronger responses for what's in a permanent transfer policy. So for me, that's ringing a little bit of a bell, and we're going to look at that in just a minute as to why. The least typical policy benefits, again, make a lot of sense if these are people who are moving that are earlier career, that maybe don't have a lot of stuff. So the home country, home sale support, home country pension payments, home country home maintenance support. Of course, home maintenance, why would you have that if it's a permanent transfer? I'm really interested in looking at that home country, home sale support and the lack of it, because actually in our database of policies, we've just been doing some analysis of that as well. And even for whether it's for assignments or for permanent transfers, we're seeing so little done with home country, home maintenance support, especially, and home country, home sale support. So I'm wondering what that means to the employee, or if we're just talking about a different kind of employee. But anyway, there on your left at the top is the spouse partner employee benefits. Remember that, because we're going to keep seeing that all the way at the bottom of the least typical policy benefits. And for me, that is saying something about, it just feels like a contradiction to what we know about dual career employees, dual career families these days. So maybe it's a signal of the early career unaccompanied single employee, but I'm going to keep asking about that in the next 12 months and thinking about it and talking about it. So if that's an issue for you too, let's talk about that together. Okay. Permanent transfers. Has your organization experienced failed company-initiated permanent transfers? That's an interesting question. And 26%, about a fourth, are saying that they have. So I think that that's really interesting too. Because imagine that you're asked to move to a new location, you've sold your stuff, you've gotten the work authorization, you've done a one-way transfer, and there's a failed assignment. If I were one of those 26% of companies that said that they have experienced failed company-initiated permanent transfers that require repatriation, I would want to have want to be thinking about that this coming year and figuring out, are there things that we could be doing around selection, around settling in services, and maybe do a little probe into what the issues are there, because it's about a fourth of the companies that we surveyed that have experienced that. And you know what? I want to go back because I think I skipped over. Yeah, this slide actually is really important to me, because this is, to me, really telling around how this permanent transfer policy is being used. We asked, do you use company-initiated permanent transfers or temporary moves? Temporary permanent. So we know that's an oxymoron. To some of you, you may be, saying, why in the world would someone use a permanent transfer policy for a temporary assignment? But for many of you, you're probably nodding your heads and saying, yes, this is perfectly normal. So we know that some companies are using their policies as temporary assignments because it's a cheaper alternative, temporary permanent. What we also know is that a lot of the support for an assignment is not going to be given in a permanent transfer. So this is technically a temporary local-to-local move, and 42% of companies, almost half, are using this policy, a permanent transfer policy, for temporary assignments because of the cost savings, right? So here's what I'm thinking. Your role as a global mobility professional, if you are one of those 42% of companies, is to make sure that the needs of the employees can be met with that policy, if it really is being used for the temporary permanent transfer, right? Your role, as I see it, is really to educate your user. That would be your business partner or your HR partner, whoever it is that's saying, let's use this policy because we got some cost savings in using it, but it's really being used for a temporary assignment. You need to share that story if you see it happening, and be able to tell people, here's what's happening. And I might say, think about how you counsel your business units on how they're using it, because it's really easy to cross lines when the bottom line is to cut that cost, and you don't have an alternative temporary assignment policy, just your long-term assignment policy, and your business units or your HR is going to jump to this policy. But as you know, it's not apples to apples. It's not Apple Light to an apple. It's actually a coconut or something. It doesn't give the same kinds of temporary support. So think about it. If this is you, if you're right there in the middle, at that 42%, think about that and how you might handle the conversation differently. You don't have to convince people to spend more money, but make sure that the guidance is there, that you're counseling your business units or your HR partners. So I think that's an interesting conversation to have, because it's enough people who said that they're using it for temporary assignments. So I wanted to talk to you about that. All right, lastly, we just wanted to know the challenges of using this policy, and I doubt there are any surprises there. Right at the middle there, the biggest, up there at the top is immigration. And as our immigration practice leader, Jennifer Bailey-Stewart, says, it's really the work authorization, not necessarily the visa, that can hold things up in most cases. That's the biggest challenge. The next one right below it there is family adjustment. So if family adjustment is really a critical piece, one of the biggest challenges, I would want to look at my policy and make sure that I'm doing enough around family adjustment to make that soft landing, to make that cushion there so that that challenge isn't, when we're thinking about the employee experience, that our policy is standing up for that. And then salary and compensation, of course, because you're asking people to move to a local salary, right? So those are the top three: immigration, work authorizations, family adjustment, and salary or compensation. All right, let's move on to the employee-initiated permanent transfers. We wanted to check on this. Now, I was really excited to see what the data was going to say about this and to really understand if it was being used, that employee-requested permanent transfer, because for a lot of companies, we saw 52% have this policy, but it's a new policy that's being used in a new way. And it goes back to that driver that I was talking about, that talent mobility driver, where we say, hey, we need, in the war for talent, to really engage our employees, give them new opportunities, consider new ways of working, and this is one of our tools. It's one of our recruiting tools. It's one of our retention tools. So I think that that's a really interesting way to look at this particular policy. War for talent, agility, flexibility, a new kind of workforce. So if this is our might be your millennial tool, right? And you might be calling it something for employee-initiated permanent transfer. You might find adventure moves. You might find a backpack move. You got to think about how you're going to talk about it in an interesting way that's appealing. So we started by asking if companies are expecting an increase in their use of employee-initiated permanent transfers in the next year. And about 20% said yes. And there were about the same number who said, I don't know. So potentially we were up to 40%, right? 60% said no, they don't see an increase. So if they're using it already, they're going to probably stay where it is, or they don't see it as a growing opportunity. But for those companies that anticipate growth, we asked about the driver. And here's why I can look at that 20% and maybe add in some of that I don't know. Let's push it up to 30%, right, a third. Give me that. Give me 10% of those I don't knows and say they think it is going to increase in the next year. But even with 20%, I think it's a significant number because of the response when we said, why do you think it's going to increase? And by far, the answers were really linked to talent strategies. And so, as I said, in the survey report that you'll be able to, spend time with starting later this week, and we're going to think about it in different ways over the course of the next several months. But there are many comments that really stand up to the fact that it's talent strategies that are doing it. So look here on your right. One participant from a manufacturing and engineering company said, we have an open recruitment policy, so anyone can apply from anywhere in the company. The second one from an entertainment industry organization said, we have a young company where millennials make up half our population. They want a global experience. So these were the responses. Anyone who said, yes, we're expecting growth, then had to give us, we asked them to give us, they didn't have to, we asked them to give us their driver for that anticipated growth. So to me, this was really interesting because it actually connects to the hypothesis that we have here at Crown, which is that this employee-initiated move is really a connection to talent mobility, to recruiting mobility, to diversity mobility, any of these new strategic evolving mobility programs. If you have that kind of program, you're probably going to have this kind of policy and use it in this way. So you may have to dust it off and say, hey, let's give this a new name, let's polish it up, because we could be using it for this talent mobility. Now, I wanted to know the causes and effects of having this policy also. So I think it's very interesting to think about it in terms of, is it increasing interest in employee-initiated permanent transfers? 25%, 1/4 said yes, it is. So to me, if I were a talent mobility kind of company and really strategic, I'd be excited about that. If I were a company that wasn't quite there yet, and many of you are, I know lots of companies where the mobility program is more strategic thinking around talent mobility than maybe some of the business partners and some of the managers who are a little more old school. So they are probably resistant, and they might be saying, you know what, I don't want us to have the policy, because if you have the policy, we're going to have to spend money on it because people will start using it. So I think that's where we are in the conversation in our industry right now, which is us, being strategic thinkers in talent mobility, you and me, all of us as peers, and then having some of our more old, maybe some companies with a little more old school strategy or managers who are resistant to using some of these new tools. So it'll be interesting. I think it's going to be a couple of years of seeing how this evolves. All right, in terms of benefits, we know that the policy benefits for an employee-initiated permanent transfer are going to be more scaled back than for the company requested, right? That makes perfect sense. It's supposed to be less expensive. It's supposed to not be where we're spending our same amount of money. We want to give people more opportunities, but at less expensive cost. So on this side, we look across the top, and the top 3 benefits make perfect sense because those are our compliance benefits, immigration, and tax consultation. And then, of course, to have a written policy with guidelines. The next level of popular benefits there, the relocation allowance, some medical insurance, temporary living, also good shipments, intercultural training, language training. You can see them there on your screen. I don't think there are big surprises except for that repatriation support, right, for a permanent transfer. That's in there, but maybe it's in there with certain guidelines around what would happen if it didn't, if this transfer didn't go well. And then the least typical policy benefits. And you can see down there dependent education support, which makes me think it's being used for early career employees who don't necessarily go with an accompanying family. And the spouse partner employee support, again, it's down there at the very bottom, makes me think it might be just being used for unaccompanied moves. And then some of the home country, home maintenance, or home country, home sale. If it is your early career employees that are using the employee-initiated permanent transfers, then, of course, they probably are early enough in their careers that they might not have those to use. So those were some of the policy benefits that were identified in the survey. All right. Now, remember, in the permanent transfers for company-requested permanent transfers, 26% said that they had experienced a failed assignment that required repatriation. When we asked it for the employee-initiated permanent transfers, only 8% said yes. And I'm convinced that this is because it's a self-motivated move. It's something that someone is really excited about. And so that failure isn't going to happen in the same way as maybe someone who felt more career pressure to take the permanent transfer to another location, or they got to that location and realized that everyone else around them was on a temporary assignment, traditional expat policy, and they were on the permanent transfer policy, and so the fit wasn't as good either, or the motivation. But we can see that this is a highly motivated group, and that the repatriation and the failed assignments are at a much lower level with these employee-requested permanent transfers. All right. Now, here's something that I think is really interesting. Remember immigration, which is still on the screen over there on the right side up at the top, much smaller amount of responses for challenges. The biggest challenge is differentiating this policy from the company-initiated permanent transfer, right? And so it is really how is the company explaining what the difference is, the justification of the difference, because as I said, this policy is going to be much more lean. And it's going to just be covering some of the basics around compliance and maybe a few other things. So to me, I think one of the conversations that we're going to be having in the next 12 months as companies are growing their use of this particular type of policy is really weighing the justification. Are we actually gaining something by retaining talent, by engaging that talent, and maybe to differentiate it so greatly between the company requested and the employee requested might be detrimental to this policy because the company is retaining that talent. Now, that said, the whole reason why you can have an employee-initiated program is if it's low-cost and agile. So I just think it's the little conundrum that we're, sort of philosophical question we're going to be asking ourselves in the industry over the next couple of years. But that differentiating between company-initiated and employee-initiated is going to be one of the key challenges that we saw in the survey, and that I think that we see companies having today too. The other challenge that I find interesting on this slide is right there in the middle also, which is the local manager, getting the local manager buy-in to allow the move to happen in the first place. And this goes back to my comment a little bit earlier about having some of our managers not necessarily on board with some of the new ways of working of this new workforce and this recruiting, engaging, and retaining talent mentality of talent mobility, that we have some local managers in different parts of the world that aren't quite there yet. So that was also a challenge that stood out. Okay, we're going to move on to Local Plus, because I want to get through all of these and maybe give you a chance for a few comments or questions here at the end. And so we're going to move on to our next set of policies that we looked at in our survey. And so we talked about permanent transfers. Now we're going to shift to this other type of policy that's gaining traction as a low-cost alternative. It's the Local Plus policy, and we have two types of Local Plus that we cover in the survey. Local Plus relocation, which is permanent, right? It's kind of like our permanent transfer light. And then Local Plus assignments, which is temporary, which is kind of like our traditional international assignment light. It's the local to local with a plus. So Local Plus is another way of moving someone with a core set of benefits in your policy with the intention to live as a local as much as possible. So the plus represents the benefits that are offered that could be based, depending on the company, on different variables like the location. It could be employee needs. It could be family needs. It could be the role or the negotiation skills of the employee. It could be the business unit that is figuring this out. But those flexible benefits, those plus benefits, I think they're similar to the flex in a core flex policy, right? So let's just take a little further look at this. And we'll start with just finding out how many companies have this type of move policy. And it's interesting, they're almost equal, right? A Local Plus relocation, so it's permanent transfer light to me, and that's 68%. And then the Local Plus temporary assignment, which is the light version of a temporary international assignment policy. Really trying to move people local to local, all right? 68%, 65%. The other big question that companies often ask as they're designing these or using these types of policies is, how do you decide on the plus? Now, I'm showing you the results here because they're kind of all over the place, aren't there? There wasn't one decider that really stood out to me. And that's interesting because it means that there isn't a one-size-fits-all. It means that many of you are dealing with this differently in terms of your philosophy around how you decide the plus. So manager choice was just as frequently mentioned as global mobility team choice, or the HR choice was right up there too. There really wasn't a one-size-fits-all on the decision, which is a shame because I think those of us who use Local Plus policies, those of you, probably want to be told which one should we be using, how should we be doing this, because deciding the plus, as you'll see in a few minutes, is a big challenge. All right, let's just start with some Local Plus relocation. Just a couple of slides here on this. We asked, of course, if you expect an increase in the next year for Local Plus relocation, and we got a 29% yes. So almost a third are expecting an increase in Local Plus relocation, light permanent transfer, right? And another third, 27%, said they don't know. So remember I told you I get more excited about the yeses that are up there at 30% than the no's that are at 44%, because I think it's the leading edge companies, it's the talent mobility companies that are really driving this. And we know many clients at Crown and many regions where we're working with different companies where Local Plus is the only way to go. In Australia, I pretty much only see Local Plus for Australian headquarter companies in terms of their temporary and permanent transfers. We're not seeing the full big packages given or robust policies. It's a very popular approach there, just as an example. All right, so when we ask why the increase, we get that cost reference and the talent strategies. Companies who anticipate the increase, it's talent that's driving it. So in the Perspectives article, we'll highlight more of these comments by participants, but it's less expensive, it's more attractive for the host country. That was there on the left. We already seen an increase, a 7% increase compared to home-based assignments. There's more of an interest in developing employees via international experiences. And then farther on your right with the manufacturing and engineering organization, they say we still need mobility, but classic international assignments are considered too expensive. So you can see it's that cost, talent requirement that's really driving these increase for those 30% of companies or more. How is it used? So Local Plus relocation, remember it's the permanent transfer light. And I really was keen to see, is this just being used in certain parts of the world or in certain country combinations, or is it everywhere? So 31% said it's just being used in certain parts of the world, and 46% said no, we use it across all, it's universally applied. So let's just take a look at what some of those responses were. We don't have to go through every single one, but you could see that there at the top a number of companies that said it's for all cross-border moves, or it's for all countries, almost all where we have a presence. Or it depends on the employee need. It's not linked to the location, meaning the plus pieces of a local-to-local move or a permanent transfer move. Maybe for high cost of living locations or emerging markets. There were just different locations where it was being used differently. So as I said, about a third of companies said, yes, we're only using it in certain regions or in certain country combinations. Now, to me, that's really interesting, and I've heard it said before, and I really like the image of this for a local plus is, local-to-local moves were really developed where you were moving someone from a like-to-like country combination, where the quality of living or the salary level or the lifestyle, maybe the culture were so similar that you could do like-to-like moves and not really have to have any pluses. But now that cost is driving our assignment programs or our mobility programs in general, then we're trying to apply this local-to-local notion to places that don't really have that like-to-like. You guys know this, but the image that I like is this big foot, small shoe, only because I've had that problem before and I know how painful it is. So the plus is really something to stretch out that shoe, or maybe something to give you that soft landing, right? And so it's really important to be able to have that if you're insistent on, or if you really have to use these lower cost approaches. So the more frequent policy benefits for local plus relocation, remember it's the permanent transfer, is, of course, immigration support, temporary living, household goods shipments, tax consultations, language is in there, and intercultural training is in there, host compensation, of course, because it's permanent transfer. Medical insurance might be in there. Now, that might be your plus, right, because let's say you're going to a location where the local medical coverage isn't either available to a foreign national or it's not at the level that your employee was willing to accept. So that might be thrown into some of those pluses as well. Some of the least frequent policy benefits, dependent education. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Again, I think sometimes local plus is for unaccompanied early career, but let's look at that. But that's a less frequent policy benefit offered in a plus. It's one of your more expensive pieces, isn't it? Spouse, partner, employee assistance, right there at the bottom. It's going to be my theme of the day. It keeps coming up at the bottom. And then cost of living differential and some of that home country support. But that makes sense. This is a permanent transfer. Here's the challenges. We're not getting immigration at the top of the challenges here for Local Plus. The challenge that most came out, by far, more than any other challenge discussed, was negotiating the plus. So that tells me that there aren't enough guidelines. For those of you using this, we need about some better guidelines around how the plus is offered. And many people who participated in the survey said that it was it can be so emotional and painful because you're asking someone to go on a permanent transfer with local to local as the assumption, and you're talking about people's homes or their schools, so that this negotiation of the plus just by far was overwhelmingly the greatest challenge that came up with local plus relocation. All right, let's move on to the assignments because this is really popular, and these are, I think, a great way to have a lower cost mobility program. And I see a lot of companies using it successfully and saying they're almost weaning their company off of the traditional long-term international assignment policies. So let's just quickly look at some of the highlights here for this one. It's the same concept as the local plus relocation, but it's for temporary assignments. So do you expect an increase? Almost 30% said yes, and about 25% said I don't know. So I'm going to grab a couple of those I don't knows. Give me 5% of those, and we're up into the 33% or 34%. I think that's a pretty good number who expect an increase in using this. Remember, we're looking at the people who are leading our industry on the talent mobility side of things, on the strategic side of things, and local plus assignments I think is a great way to go, lower cost assignments. So why is that increase? We're always going to ask, well, if you said yes, why? And what we are seeing is that the cost savings, of course, is right there to the traditional cost savings compared to the traditional assignment policy and the flexibility. So we have there on the left the flexibility and adjustments for budget. Right there in the middle, it's just cheaper than the long-term assignment. And right there on the right, local plus assignment is our primary mobility policy, and this year we have job expertise requirements to fill. And you see at the bottom there, that's from a logistics and mobility services participant. I know that company well because that's my own company. That's Crown World Mobility and Crown Worldwide, actually. And we have, about 20% of our employees that are moving around the world at any given time, and we have a global careers path for our country managers and a few other roles, and we'll always use local plus. We're never going to be giving people the traditional long-term international assignment policies because that's not our corporate culture or our philosophy. But we're pretty good at moving. So anyway, that's where we are, and that's our head of HR talking in the survey as well. Okay, how is the local plus assignment policy used? Is it used for certain regions? Remember I said local to local was supposed to be for like to like, but we know now it's being used for low cost and not necessarily apples to apples, but apples to coconuts, right? So we need to know, we wanted to know, is it only being used in certain parts of the world or between certain countries? And about a third said, yeah, it's just being used for those, and about more than half, which is interesting, said, no, we're applying it universally. So we gave some examples of that. Short-term distances between locations was one scenario that some companies are using. High cost of living and high-cost housing locations was where the plus was given. Senior moves between lower tax jurisdictions might be used, that more local to local approach with a few pluses, right? One company said it's in almost all countries, or it's not linked to the country, it's linked to the employee need. So there's a lot more description in the survey report. Then we said, I was curious because to me a local plus policy, ideally, it's kind of like here's our low cost. It's like the permanent transfer, employee-initiated permanent transfer, that maybe this is our backpack policy. This is our adventure policy, right? So I wanted to know, is it mostly being used for single status? And at the end of the day, looking at those numbers, it's about equal, isn't it? It's not. There are a lot of people using it for family accompaniment. So maybe it's, hey, our driver is low cost, but when we have family accompaniment, the plus is awesome because it gives us flexibility to meet a family's needs while not escalating up to the traditional long-term international assignment policy. So I like that. That's fine. We saw it's even. So that's an interesting story to me, that it's not just leaning in one direction of the single status use, but really even. Okay. Most frequent policy benefits right there at the top. These are the ones that are probably in the local to local move policy without the pluses, right, when needed. So we see the immigration and the household goods shipments, the tax consultation, medical insurance, some things that are pretty high priority there. And then in the middle, we see settling in assistance, some language training, dependent education support, right? So that's not always offered, but it might be a pretty significant plus because if we're moving families, that's often the case. Now, we're going to look at that in a little more detail in just a second because not all dependent education support is the same. And we're going to look at that in more detail with the localizations in just a second. And what I find is whether it's dependent education or it's housing allowance, that a lot of times with Local Plus, it will not be the traditional expat support, but it might be a stipend or it might be some more limited type of allowance or support. And then there at the bottom for Local Plus assignment policy, we see the spouse partner employment support right there at the very bottom, one of the least frequent policy benefits. But when we think about our dual career families moving and the fact that it's such a low-cost support, it might be one of those pluses that would delight as opposed to break the bank. So I'm going to keep asking you guys about this. Who's using it and why, and who has it higher up in their policies than others? Okay, let's keep going. The Local Plus assignments, there were 3 challenges that stood out, and the most salient one was deciding the benefits. So that's the biggest challenge there for Local Plus for international assignments. And to me, it's saying we need to really focus on communication and guidelines, right? We need to be advisors to whoever it is in our organization that is focusing on that is deciding those benefits, because that's such a challenge. All right, we have one last policy type that we looked at in our survey that was really indicative of this drive for talent mobility, this drive for being more strategic and smarter mobility, and the drive to lower costs, and that's localization. So I'll just spend a couple of minutes and go through these findings with you, and it looks like we will have some time for a few questions. So start thinking about, or comments if you want to share some either challenge or success that you're having with any of these policy types. All right, so for localization, we asked, is your company using it? And 61% of you said yes, and 16% said not yet, but we're planning to add this. So to me, I quickly add that up to the 77%, and I'm excited about that. That's a large number of people who are using localization. Only a few of you aren't using localization at all. Now, we know here at Crown from all the policies that we see and that we write for many of you that localization is always included in any kind of long-term international assignment policy or temporary policy, but using it and putting it in practice is something different. So many of you are using this. I think it's part of that smarter mobility that we as global mobility professionals have, you all as professionals out there, because I think you're doing a better job at getting your organizations to recognize that permanent international assignees, or those permanent expats are no longer acceptable. And so if they're no longer acceptable, we have to be able to localize people and put that in place. So I think that's kudos to many of you on this call who are doing a better job at convincing your organizations to stand by the governance that you have in that program to say, okay, 2 years, 3 years, maybe 5 years, but we don't need anybody out there longer than that. It doesn't make any financial sense, and it doesn't make sense for that role. All right, so which localization approach do you use the most? What we know is that there are a few different ways to localize employees, right? And some companies are going to do it by an immediate transition straight to local at the end of the assignment. Some are going to do that transition to local over time. And some of you are going to do a transition and turn it into a local plus relocation, meaning that you will have some permanent benefits. You're not going to wean them all the way off of their expat packages. So I think that that's interesting, and I think there are different reasons to do that. It may be where you're moving people. It may be your corporate culture and how you want to treat people in your organization. It may be just the challenges that a manager has in transitioning people. But, again, it's just showing you that there isn't one size fits all. You can see that most people are transitioning to local over a period of time. Out of these, the 40%. and but there are, you know, more than 30% of you that are transitioning straight to local. And then that about a fourth of you have are doing it more like a local plus. All right. If you offer temporary transition support for localization, we want to know how long that temporary transition support lasts. I think I would just focus on this slide on those two long bars there going out horizontally. So either you're doing it for the most part between 2 years and 3 years, 24 to 36 months of support temporarily, and weaning someone off. It's often done as a wind down, or 6 months. So you're saying, okay, you don't have to cut it off right on the day of the transition, but within the next 6 months we're going to be weaning it off. Now, to me, it's very interesting. I'll let you look at this slide while I talk to you for a second about this, because one of the things that we know about localization, just based anecdotally on the conversations that you have with people who either refuse to localize or they have localized, is that it's the closest thing as you can get to being a highly successful employee who is then, what the feeling is that they're demoted from the employee's perspective, which is why setting those expectations, communicating effectively are so important, because you've been living for 2 years, for 3 years, for 5 years, for however long on a full international assignment package, and it's being cut off, you're being localized, and you think, hey, I've been successful, I actually made a sacrifice to move here, I adapted, I'm now bicultural, I have a lot of international experience, and you know what, you're taking away my international assignment package, and it feels like a demotion. So what we hear some companies saying is that they will often give that person some kind of either promotion or raise at the time of the localization as a way to say, look, we value you, we want to keep you, but we're not going to keep you on the expat package. We'll look at your compensation and look at your role and show how we value you in that way instead. But anyway, so that to me is one of the reasons why it's really challenging, and you do see these long, drawn-out 2 to 3 year transitions, or you do see some negotiation there. So the top 5 temporary transition support benefits provided in localization, right across the top you see the housing allowance, which we know to be true not just in our study, but a lot of studies out there have shown that. Tax assistance, because you want people to be compliant, and that's a challenge. And education, dependent education. We have medical insurance and home country housing support in there too, but the home country housing is 11%. Dependent education is right up there, 43%. But those top 2 are the top 2 types of transition support. Again, I find that housing allowance is much more, it's less of the traditional expat, the full package, but it's some kind of subsidy. And then oops, I skipped a slide, sorry. The top 6 ongoing support. So this is for the people who maybe turn into a local plus, housing support of some kind, tax legalization of some kind, medical insurance of some kind. Dependent education is down there at the bottom with Social Security, and the little home lease. So there's like almost 20%, 18% who are saying, hey, you're going to be permanent, but we're going to throw in, maybe it's once a year, maybe it's once every 3 years, but some people are getting some kind of ongoing home leave even though you're localizing. So that's interesting to me too to see. For those who are giving dependent education, we got a lot of different responses. And so in the survey report, if this is a topic that you're really keen on, I would even look at this as some guidance for the Local Plus policy too, in terms of how companies are paying that dependent education in terms of what's offered and for how long. But I wanted to show you the range of responses, and there were a lot more of those, but they were really anecdotal in terms of how the dependent education is being offered. So if this is a topic that's challenging for you or that you're interested in seeing what other companies are doing, then I would definitely grab the survey report and look at the full range of examples that are in there of the different ways that companies are handling this. And then finally, again, because of that notion of demotion, I really wanted to see if companies are doing this, more than 60% and another 16% are looking to add it, if you are doing it, I wanted to know, is it successful? Because it feels like it, it can be so challenging. And 64% of you who are doing this said it is successful. And then 36% said it's challenging. So I wanted to know, well, what are those success factors there? So we looked at this, we asked about this in the study, and we found what I think is actually very hopeful. It's really a great story, which is that for those companies that say that their localization strategy is successful, they can put it up to good communication and expectation setting by far. Look at that, 78% said that. Only 22% said they were willing to provide transition support, and that's what made it successful. So to me, this is great because it means that if I'm having challenges with my localization program, if I wouldn't deem it, if I'm one of those 22% who say, I have it, but it's so challenging, it's so, I wouldn't call it so successful, then what I would focus on in 2018 is my communication strategy and the expectation setting, maybe some internal training on that for the HR and for business leaders on how to talk about it throughout the life of the assignment so that we can get people off of those long-term international assignments and into local roles, and to do a better job of the expectation setting, not just right up front. We know it's in a policy. It might be there in the policy briefing, but it's the last thing I'm thinking about as I embark on my international assignment. So it happens annually, or it happens with enough frequency. Maybe there are examples of people who have localized that we can promote and highlight in different ways. So it's about good communication and expectation setting. So I actually loved that those were the success factors, and not piling a lot of money on the transition support, right? And doing that. So I thought that was important. Okay, here we are at the top of the hour, and so I'm sorry because I think I get a little passionate about this, and I wanted to share as much as possible with you. So my final thoughts are just going big on communication and expectation setting. Let's keep our eye on those employee-initiated moves as our talent mobility strategy and just area in our industry evolves, and plan to give more guidelines for any flexible benefits, from Core Flex to Local Plus to permanent transfers with the Plus benefits. So I want to thank you all for joining us, and I'm afraid because we're out of time, you can just please type in some questions, or you can send them directly to us, and I promise I will answer each and every one.